Are you intimidated by the settings of your camera? I promise, if you understand how they collaborate, everything will fall into place and photography will become an instinct rather than having to think about settings all the time. And at the end of the video, I will even give you this amazing cheat sheet to print out. So you now know most of the details about scene luminance, aperture, shutter speed and ISO. But there is one amazingly cool and helpful thing that you don't yet know. They are 100% interchangeable when it comes to image brightness. Let me start explaining what that means by having a closer look at scene luminance. Here is a part of my very popular exposure bar cheat sheet. I have listed a few possible lighting scenarios, starting with the most amount of light on the right, in this case full sun outdoors, and continuing with light in professional indoor sports arenas, professional outdoor sports, scenes lit by a fireplace or streetlights, finally down to a scene lit by the full moon or a scene lit by stars only. Photographers call these units stops. The correct term is exposure value. One stop or one exposure value cuts the light in half. As you can see, if the sun partly hides behind the cloud, we lose one stop or one EV of light. Scene brightness is already cut in half compared to full sun. When it completely hides behind a cloud, we lose another stop. So that's 2 stops and we have only 1/4 of the light left. If the clouds get more dense, we will lose another stop. That's now 3 stops. Continuing that, you see that indoors in a regular gym where your kids play basketball, you usually lose 8 stops of light and only get 1/256th of the light that you'd get outdoors in full sun. Or look at the symbol for the light under the Christmas tree. There's only 1/8000th of the light left. Don't worry, you don't have to remember these. No professional photographer does that. That's why we have fancy cameras. But it helps to understand how dramatic the loss of light is. Much more dramatic than we think, because our eyes, or better said our brain, still show us a usable image. While the difference for the camera is this versus that. Now I'll show you the next row of my exposure bars cheat sheet. You know that setting the aperture, for example from f5.6 to f8, blocks some light. What you don't know yet is that the light is exactly cut in half too. So does going from f8 to f11 or any other of these units. From f1 to f1.4 light is cut in half, from f1.4 to f2 light is cut in half again, so we are at 1/4, then 1/8, 1/16th and so on. I sincerely hope you see the pattern. We had the same up here. We are again talking about stops. And now you're probably not all that surprised that the same is true for shutter speed. Let me reveal the next row of my cheat sheet. Actually, there are 2 rows for shutter speed because in modern cameras you can set it from 30 seconds to 1/8000th of a second, lately even more. Again, you don't have to remember any of these exact values, just remember that every single of these possible settings is a stop and cuts the light in half. Easiest to understand, of course, going from 2 seconds to 1 second, because 1 second is half as long as 2 seconds. Why don't you have to remember all that? Because it gets even easier. One stop on your camera is represented by 3 clicks on either your dials for shutter speed or aperture. 3 clicks on your camera dial will cut the brightness in one direction in half or double the brightness in the other direction. 3 clicks is 1 stop. That's why I have added the possible value for third stops to my cheat sheet. Each of these lines now represents a third stop, or 1 click on your camera. And believe it or not, it gets even better. The same is true for the gain. Remember, that's ISO. 3 clicks means doubling or halving image brightness. And if the same is true for all 3 camera settings, it means they are completely interchangeable when it comes to image brightness. So let's say, like in our example from lesson 3, we raise the shutter speed by 3 clicks. To compensate for that loss of light, all we need to do is adjust the aperture by 3 clicks in the other direction. Or if aperture is already at its limits for the lens we used, we could compensate with ISO instead. That's super easy. A click is a click is a click. Unfortunately, there is one exception. A few Canon entry-level cameras wouldn't let you set third steps for ISO, but only full stops. Thank you, Canon, for unnecessarily making photography more complicated for beginners. You will get a strike. But for everyone else, 3 clicks is 1 stop. No matter if 3 clicks aperture, 3 clicks shutter speed, or 3 clicks ISO. Now here's the most important part in all this. The camera settings are no magic mix, but always the reaction to this bar on top. Scene brightness. If scene brightness gets darker by 1 stop, we need to compensate with one of the other settings down here. So let's say you photographed your kid outdoors playing basketball. You took an image and the camera chose 1/1600th of a second. What would that mean for an indoor shot? We would have to go from 15 down to 7. From 15 to 7 would be 8 stops. If we'd compensate those 8 stops by choosing a slower shutter speed, or better said a long exposure time, we'd end up at 1/6 of a second. That's way too long to freeze action, and we'd end up with a completely blurred shot. Since we used a lens on which we cannot set a lower aperture than f4, what else can we do? Correct, our only chance is to compensate with a gain. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 stops. We end up at ISO 25,600. That's extraordinarily high, and you'd end up with a pretty crappy and noisy image. What does that tell you? In photography, we cannot always get what we want. We are hugely dependent on the light levels. If the light gets low, we have to make compromises. Getting noise in a shot like this has nothing to do with you being bad at low light photography. I often read, I need to practice low light photography because I'm bad at that. No, you cannot practice something that you can't influence. No matter how much you practice, ISO 25600 will always look crappy. Now you may wonder why you see all those fantastic NBA basketball shots in magazines and newspapers. Well, first, if you look at my chart, you see that professional basketball arenas are much better lit. They're up to 5 stops above a regular indoor gym. So when shooting a professional game, you could lower the gain by those 5 stops. That would get us to ISO 800. The difference is massive. Beside that, professional sports photographers shoot with more expensive lenses. A very popular sports lens is the 70-200 with an aperture of f2.8. Going from f4 to f2.8 will block 1 stop less light. Blocking 1 stop less light means getting 1 stop more light into the sensor, and we can reduce ISO by another stop. We end up at ISO 400. And third, they use more expensive cameras. Of course, there is a reason why they do. ISO 400 on their camera may create the same amount of noise as ISO 100 does on your camera. Now, I totally get that you don't want to spend $3,000 on a sports lens or an additional $4,000 on a camera just to photograph your kids in a badly lit gym. So let me show you at least a partial workaround. Oh wait, before I do, you still haven't subscribed to my channel. Nor have you liked this video yet. Why should I help you if you don't help me? Okay, that's better. Thank you for your support. Here is the workaround. This is a very cheap 50mm f1.8 portrait lens. f1.8, let's have a look at what that means on our chart. Starting at f4, that brings us down by 2 1/3 stop. That's 7 clicks. Let's reduce ISO by that amount. We end up at ISO 5000. Not great, but hey, we don't have an NBA arena at hand. With this 50mm lens, you might not get the same reach as you would with a 200mm lens, so you would have to get closer to the action. But why not talk to the coach and ask if you could photograph right on the field during a training session? Or why not ask him whether you could do a training session outdoors in much better lighting? I bet the other parents would be delighted to get some images of their kids. And that brings me to a very important point. I told you in lesson 1, you have a choice when it comes to lighting and composition. You don't just have to snap what is there. Control your environment whenever you can for the best possible shot. Particularly if you shoot entry-level gear, understand the limitations of your camera and concentrate on what you can do, namely going outdoors for better lighting, rather than get frustrated over what you cannot do. If that lesson seemed a bit much to grasp, let me recommend enrolling to the Wolf method. It is particularly helpful for people who don't learn technical stuff all that quick. It's not only really affordable, moreover, you get a full 7-day money-back guarantee. So there is no reason to not immediately try it. You can find the link to the Wolf method and to the cheat sheet in the description. Are you as excited for the next video as I am? I promise the excitement is worth it. See you there.